The cafe was crowded, but as cold as a room without warmth. The grinder droned, cups kissed the wood, chairs scraped. Every sound kept moving. Only kindness stood still. By the window, a man in a frayed coat and peeling shoes cupped a porcelain mug for heat. No one looked up, no one greeted him. He sat there like a shadow, paying for a little warmth. Behind the counter, Clyde leaned toward Mara, whispering but making sure the stranger could hear. Bet the boss is off somewhere counting money. We break our backs for loose change. Why bother being nice? Mara glanced at the man in the worn coat, her smile thin and sharp. Look at him. So shabby. Worth saying a single word to? The guest's hand tightened around the handle. The glaze trembled. Inside him, silence rose. Heavy, deep, and dangerous in the way only someone who built a dream from nothing understands. The nameless customer they belittled was in fact David, the founder of this chain, choosing to sit among the crowd in the plainest guise, to hear the true heartbeat of the place that bore his name. He hadn't come to look at numbers. A report can recite revenue, but it can't measure dignity. David wanted to test the endurance of something invisible, the atmosphere. Here it wasn't the air conditioning that made people cold. It was whether a server said hello or ignored you as if you didn't exist. Clyde shoved a glass of water onto the table with deliberate force. Droplets ringed the wood, rippling close to a neighboring guest's sleeve. He smirked. Wobbly table, not my fault. The guest paused, not angry. He simply set the straw aside, the way you set aside the intention to return. Mara let out a small laugh, one without courage. Not loud enough to be an attack, but sharp enough to hurt. In that moment, David saw something clearly. Cruelty rarely starts with a shout. It begins with withering looks, offhand slights, a thank you swallowed back on the tongue. At the end of the counter, Dorian, the young employee, polished a tabletop until it gleamed, sweeping up crumbs others didn't bother to see. A customer raised a hesitant hand. Before Clyde could roll his eyes, Dorian was there. His voice was small, neat, sincere. I've got you. Thank you for waiting. Clyde jerked his chin. Drop the act. Nobody needs fancy words. Mara nodded for show, but her eyes slipped off beat, as if a part of her briefly rejected the smile she'd just worn. David watched like a surgeon through glass, every step by the book, but something vital missing: life. He remembered clearly when he stood behind this counter, every person who walked in was greeted like family. A cup of coffee then was more than a drink. It was a declaration. You matter here. A young woman left her table, half her cup untouched. The chair scraped with a dry sound, like a red slash across the cafe's ledger of history. No one apologized. No one said, see you again. Only Clyde's voice rose above every other sound. Don't like it. Leave. Plenty more people. David set down his cup. Porcelain touched wood with a soft yet caring note. He didn't frown, didn't sigh. He simply checked, quietly, the lessons he'd taught. Politeness is the minimum. Care is the difference. Respect is the identity. Today the minimum was gone, the difference missing, the identity being erased. Dorian bent to wipe the spilled water, murmuring to the guest, I'm sorry for the inconvenience. The man nodded, his eyes softening. One well-timed apology, plain, not flowery, rescued a fragile thread. David noted, even when the room is cold, a small source of heat still lives. He sat still and let the truth reveal itself. The cafe was still noisy, but he heard something else. The space between the noise, where there ought to be laughter, gratitude, the sound of returning footsteps. That space was growing. Leave it unchecked, and it would swallow every seat. And in that space, a decision began to set. The silence could not stretch much longer. But before speaking, David needed one last beat of observation to prove the problem wasn't in the recipe, but in how people here treated one another. A cafe can sell flavor. Only respect preserves memory. David sat there, eyes looking through the bar as if into a distant time. Before him were not just Clyde or Mara, but the silhouette of himself years ago. Thin, a threadbare coat failing to block the wind, hands cracked from the cold. He remembered the old coffee cart, its wheels squeaking over broken pavement. Every stop, his hands trembled not only from chill, but from fear. Fear of selling nothing, fear of going to bed on an empty stomach. And yet he kept standing, kept smiling. Water boiled in a small kettle, steam rising like a sliver of hope. Each cup of coffee handed over, paired with a greeting and a warm gaze, became a bridge connecting him to the world. Some left a few coins, some only said thank you. But to David, every thank you was capital more precious than money. It fed him and kept the dream alive through long winter nights. Then one morning he turned the key to his first tiny shop. The smell of fresh paint lingered. The white walls were a blank page. He told himself, this place won't just sell coffee, it will be where people feel respected. From that day, that philosophy became his compass. One shop, then more followed. But his pride never lived in a ledger. It lived in moments when guests lingered a little longer because they felt safe, in laughter spilling like warm light across the room. To David, coffee was never just a job. It was his way of telling the world, you matter, you are seen. Today, hearing Clyde speak with contempt and seeing Mara's forced smile to avoid confrontation, his chest felt heavy as stone. He feared that the flame that once blazed on a rain-soaked curb had gone out inside the very house he built. And there, within his memory, he drew a lesson many forget. A brand grows on capital, but a legacy endures on the memories and emotions we leave in others. The essence of success isn't opening more stores, it's opening more hearts. David knew the real challenge today wasn't falling revenue, it was the spirit of the dream running dry. And he decided this truth must be brought to light before it kills everything. David sat quietly like a shadow in the noisy room. He didn't look at the menu, didn't care about prices. What he sought were the details few bothered to notice. The way an employee wiped a table, how they met a customer's eyes, or simply the tone in which they said, thank you. Slowly, everything came into focus. Clyde stood behind the counter, shoulders slouched, a crooked smile appearing only when he mocked. Every word he threw out carried disdain, as if customers were burdens, not the very reason the cafe existed. Mara was different. She wasn't cruel to the core, but her habit of laughing along to avoid conflict cut just as deep. That thin, nervous smile of hers became sharp as a blade, because it made those dismissed feel truly invisible. And then there was Dorian. The young man spoke little, never loudly, but his actions brimmed with care. He polished tables until they shone like mirrors, picked up crumbs everyone else ignored. A customer hesitated with a raised hand. Before Clyde could roll his eyes, Dorian was already there. His voice was soft, clear, and sincere. Thank you for waiting. Just a phrase, but the slight bow of his head, the steady gaze, was enough to draw a relieved smile from the guest. David's mind flashed back to cold nights with the old coffee cart, when he too had spoken such words. Not for tips, but to let a stranger know they still mattered. In this stark contrast, David saw the truth. A cafe is not defined by its tables or menu, but by the attitude of those behind the counter. Every word, every gesture shapes the air the room breathes. He told himself, a contemptuous remark can drive a guest away forever. A timely thank you can keep them for life. Watching Dorian, David knew the cafe's soul still breathed, though faintly. It was like a candle flickering in the draft, ready to flare brighter with a touch of warmth or be snuffed out with one more blow. Amid Clyde's mocking laughter and Mara's hollow nods, David heard another rhythm, the quiet heartbeat of a young man who dared to preserve kindness, and he understood. This place was not yet dead. The problem wasn't the cafe itself, but the way those in uniform had chosen to live within it. The atmosphere in the cafe began to shift, not because the background music changed, but because customers slowly slipped away in silence. A young woman stood, leaving behind a cup of coffee untouched. The scrape of her chair echoed dry and sharp, like a cut across David's heart. He watched her go, and in her eyes there was no anger, only hurt, the kind of quiet wound that ensures she would never return. At another table, an old man placed a few bills on the counter and walked out. No words of thanks, no farewell glance. To Clyde, it was just loose change, nothing to remember. But to David, every coin left without a smile was bitter proof. The cafe was losing its most valuable treasure, trust. Clyde leaned against the counter, voice dripping with disdain. Boss is probably off somewhere, counting cash while we're the ones carrying the load. Mara chuckled along, her laughter ringing hollow, more a cover for her unease than true amusement. David sat still, his hand tightening into a fist. This was no longer about revenue. Each empty chair was a crack in the cafe's soul. People weren't leaving because the coffee was weak or the food lukewarm. They left because they felt dismissed. And once that feeling touches the heart, no marketing campaign can bring them back. At that moment, Dorian was the only candle in the darkening room. He bowed to the departing old man, his voice quiet but firm. "Thank you, sir." The words seemed trivial, yet they warmed David's chest. He knew gratitude isn't a formality. It's the thread that ties people to a place. And he realized something else. A business never dies from lacking money in a single day. It withers when respect is absent day after day. When customers leave carrying only silence, that silence itself becomes the harshest verdict. David felt himself standing at a crossroads. On one side was the legacy he had built with trembling hands on icy sidewalks years ago. On the other, the indifference now devouring everything. He knew if he stayed silent any longer, the death of his dream would arrive. Not with noise, but with empty chairs that spoke louder than words. The heavy atmosphere now felt ready to shatter. Clyde straightened up, his voice sharp, almost shrill as if to assert dominance. "If customers don't like it, they can leave. I'm the one who decides here." His words cut through the cafe like a blade, tearing apart the respect that should have defined this place. Mara forced a laugh, but her eyes flickered with fear. She knew Clyde had gone too far, yet lacked the courage to stop him. At a nearby table, a young woman froze. Her hand hovered over a cup she hadn't even sipped. Lips pressed tight, eyes lowered, she stood, walked away without a word. The screech of her chair scraped across the floor like a wound opening wide. To Clyde, she was just a difficult customer. To David, she was a mortal blow, a soul who left carrying disappointment instead of warmth. David's memory flashed back to freezing nights on the street, smiling patiently just to keep one kind look from a stranger. And now in his own cafe, guests walked out with cold eyes. This wasn't just failure, it was betrayal of the principle he'd once carved in stone. Coffee is just an excuse. Respect is the reason people return. Dorian could take no more. His face flushed, voice trembling but resolute. "You can't say that. Every customer deserves respect." His words landed like a strike against the wall of silence. But Clyde sneered, arrogance bare and raw. "Respect? For people like that? Worthless." The words fell heavier than any insult. They didn't just belittle a customer, they trampled the very trust David had placed in his team. David's hand clenched around the porcelain cup, knuckles white. Inside, anger surged like a wave, but he held his silence. He knew when the dreamer finally spoke, his words had to be final, irrevocable. Mara's lips quivered, as if she wanted to speak up, but she swallowed the words. In her hesitant eyes, David glimpsed a fracture. Not all was lost. They were not rotten to the core, only led astray by a voice too loud. The room sank into a hushed stillness. Everyone seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what would follow such an insult. A line had been crossed, and David understood. If he remained silent now, every value he built would collapse. At that moment, the cafe seemed to hold its breath. Clyde's insult still echoed, heavy as a stain on the walls. Mara lowered her head, Dorian's fist clenched tight, and the customers sat in silence, their eyes filled with anger they didn't voice. David set his cup down. The soft tap of porcelain on wood seemed meaningless, yet it rang out like a bell in an empty temple. Every gaze turned toward him. The shabby man with worn shoes, the one who had been quietly dismissed, now slowly rising to his feet. The scrape of his chair across the floor clawed through the dense air, freezing the room. No one had called his name. No one knew who he was, but suddenly all were compelled to look. David lifted his head. His eyes, lined by years of labor, shone with an uncommon fire. Clyde sneered, his voice mocking yet trembling at the edges. "What do you want, old man?" David stepped forward. He didn't shout, didn't point fingers. His voice was low, steady, but it struck every heart in the cafe. "If I am not worthy of respect, then tell me, who is?" The words carried no anger, only truth. A truth no one could deny. The room wavered. Clyde froze, his smirk evaporating into clumsy confusion. Mara's hand dropped the rag she was holding. Dorian exhaled sharply, as though a weight had been lifted from his chest. The customers whispered, eyes widening, their suspicion giving way to realization. This man wasn't a poor drifter. He was David, the founder, the heart, the soul of this place. David stood there, shoulders bent under years of burden, yet his voice resounded like a bronze bell. I am not angry. I am only now disappointed. And it was disappointment, not rage, that truly shook Clyde. No shouting, no threats, just quiet sorrow. But it pierced deeper than fury, making everyone feel they had crossed a line that could not be excused. The cafe fell into bowed silence, the air heavy with regret. David let the pause stretch, long enough for every soul to feel its weight. For sometimes one sustained note echoes louder than an entire storm. And when he finally raised his eyes again, all knew. The true reckoning had begun. The room froze after David's words. The sorrow in his voice had struck harder than anger, forcing Clyde, Mara, and everyone present to lower their eyes. No one dared break the silence until David lifted his gaze, letting it sweep across every face. He drew a deep breath, then spoke slowly, his tone steady and weighty. I will not fire you today. You still have one chance. 24 hours. In that time, turn this place into a cafe where even you would want to sit down. If you succeed, you'll keep your jobs, and more than that, you'll be rewarded. If not, tomorrow, I myself will lock these doors. The words fell like an iron weight. Clyde forced a scoff, trying to cover the tremor in his voice. Childish game. You think you can scare us with that? But his crooked smile faltered, his eyes shifting nervously. Mara stood frozen, her hands twisting, breath uneven. In her eyes, for the first time, flickered not just fear, but a faint shadow of regret. Dorian stood tall, his eyes shining, his voice firm and clear. We can do this. If we truly try, if we serve with sincerity, we can change. His words sparked like a flame in the night. A few customers nodded. Mara hesitated, but this time she didn't laugh along. Clyde still postured with defiance, yet his rigid stance betrayed unease. David looked at all three, then turned toward the door. He didn't need to add more. His hand on the frame, his voice lowered but cut the air like carved stone. Tomorrow I will return, and then I don't want to see just hands carrying trays. I want to see hearts that know how to respect people. The door closed behind him. The wind chime tinkled softly, yet it rang like a gavel declaring the opening of a trial. Customers murmured. Everyone knew they had just witnessed not a warning, but a test of life and death for the cafe's soul. The next 24 hours would decide revival or the burial of a dream. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the glass panes, illuminating specks of dust floating in the air. The wooden door creaked open, and the first customer stepped inside. He adjusted his coat, his eyes scanning as if to test whether anything had changed. Clyde was the first to greet him. He forced the corners of his mouth up, but the smile sat stiff, like a mask that didn't fit. His words of welcome came out hollow, lifeless. The customer frowned slightly. He sensed the falseness instantly, a shell too brittle to warm anyone. Mara approached next, her voice wavering. Welcome. Glad to have you here. The words were thin, her eyes darting away, unwilling to meet the man's gaze. It wasn't sincerity, just a rehearsed line. Then came Dorian. He stepped forward, posture straight, voice clear and simple. Good morning. I hope you have a wonderful day. It wasn't flawless, but it was genuine. And it was that sincerity that made the customer's shoulders relax, his lips curve into a real smile. In that small moment, it was as if the room opened to a fresh breeze. Hidden in the corner in his worn coat, David felt the weight on his chest ease slightly. Such tiny gestures were the lifeblood he had once planted into this cafe. Clyde noticed, unsettled. He muttered under his breath, "Nonsense. Customers don't care about those fancy words." Yet when he served the next order, his hand trembled. This time the cup wasn't slammed onto the wood but placed more carefully. Not because he wanted to change, but because the echo of that customer's smile still lingered, making it impossible to ignore. Mara, too, found herself pausing. She leaned toward a young woman near the window, softly asking, "Would you like a little extra sugar?" Her voice shook, but the customer looked up, surprised, then smiled in thanks. For the first time, Mara felt a quiet joy in being acknowledged for a gesture of care. David noticed everything. He knew these shifts weren't enough to save an entire cafe, but they were green shoots on dry soil. Seeds of kindness need only a little light to sprout. At the counter, Dorian kept wiping tables, eyes glinting with hope. He understood change doesn't arrive in a single strike. It begins in small choices. Bowing at the right moment, saying a genuine thank you, setting down a cup with both hands instead of tossing it down. David whispered to himself, "No one truly changes out of fear, but anyone can change when they realize they still have worth." And he knew then. These 24 hours were not just a test for his staff. They were a chance for the cafe itself to rediscover its breath, its heartbeat, thought lost, now faint but undeniable. By noon, the cafe began to fill again. Chairs scraped, cups clinked, voices rose. But this time the sounds carried a different weight. The atmosphere had shifted, subtly yet unmistakably. An elderly man in the corner took a sip of his coffee and suddenly smiled. "It's been a long time since this place felt this pleasant." The words were soft as breath, yet they rang like a bell. Mara lowered her head, murmuring, "Thank you." The awkward smile on her lips was clumsy, but it stripped away the chill from her face. Clyde behind the counter hesitated. He wanted to sneer as usual, but the sound wouldn't come. His hand gripped a cup more steadily, his movement slower, more deliberate. He recalled the moment a guest smiled after he stirred in extra sugar. Just a tiny detail, but it lingered like an aftertaste. For the first time, a crack opened in his chest for light to seep through. Dorian moved briskly around the cafe, not hurried but attentive. He checked on tables, spoke gently, wiped away small stains. Guests nodded, smiles spread, and the room filled with quiet reassurance. A young woman snapped a photo, quickly posting online, "The cafe feels so different today, warm, unexpectedly comforting." That single line was like a spark carried outward, spreading belief beyond the walls. From his hidden corner, David watched. He saw small changes weaving into a living thread. Genuine greetings, cups set down with care, eyes no longer avoiding contact. These little things stitched the room back into warmth. A faint smile touched his lips as he thought, no miracles needed. Just a little sincerity, and a whole room can transform. The values he once carved into his heart now stood clearer than ever. Respect is not a memorized skill, but a choice repeated every day. A customer who feels valued becomes a truer ambassador than any advertisement. The cafe began to breathe again. Not a hurried breath, but a steady, warm rhythm, like walls remembering why they were built in the first place. The next morning, the wooden door opened once more. The man in the worn coat stepped inside, his pace unhurried, his eyes sharp as glass. David chose the same familiar corner table. He said nothing, only observed. This time, the picture before him was different. Clyde approached first, his back slightly bent, voice no longer arrogant. "Good morning, sir. Wishing you a peaceful day." The words were awkward, but genuine. His smile uneven, yet his eyes didn't dart away. Mara followed, carrying a tray, bowing slightly. "Thank you for coming back." For the first time, her voice carried sincerity, not the bitter laugh of yesterday. Dorian remained steady, warm, the same enduring flame. "We're truly glad to see you again." David stayed silent, letting time speak. He watched carefully, Mara adjusting sweetness to a customer's taste, Clyde setting a cup down with both hands instead of slamming it, Dorian polishing tables with an easy smile. Guests responded with nods and laughter, the air in the cafe warming like a home rekindled. When he had seen enough, David rose. The scrape of his chair silenced the room. Every eye turned to him, waiting for judgment. His voice rang low and firm. "In the past 24 hours, you have proven one thing. Attitudes can change. And when attitudes change, everything changes." Tension dissolved, replaced by relief. Clyde bowed, shoulders trembling, eyes red. Mara wiped away a tear. Dorian stood tall, his gaze burning with pride. David continued, steady and clear. I will not only keep you, I will raise your wages. Not as charity, but as recognition. Because true value isn't in numbers. It's in how you choose to respect your work and people. Applause erupted, waves crashing against the cafe walls. It wasn't just for his decision. It was acknowledgement that the soul of the cafe had been restored. David looked at the three, a gentle smile flickering across his face. Money, success, even love, mean nothing if we do not know how to respect each other. Respect is the root of it all. In that moment, the cafe was no longer just a shop. It became a symbol, a testament that when people truly change from within, a dream can live again, stronger than ever. By late afternoon, sunlight spilled across the sidewalk. Customers left the cafe with unhurried steps, each carrying a quiet smile. Not because the coffee tasted better than yesterday, but because they had witnessed something rare, a cafe that had found its heart again. One young guest pulled out her phone, typing quickly. I thought I'd never return here, but today felt completely different. Warm atmosphere, polite staff, and a real sense of being valued. The post spread, shared again and again, until the story traveled far beyond the cafe's small walls. Behind the counter, Clyde's hands trembled as he touched a neatly folded tip a customer had left. He no longer saw it as money, but as proof that his respect had finally been returned. Mara's eyes softened as she looked around, seeing each guest not as a burden, but as a person. Dorian remained quiet, still wiping tables, but his smile lingered. He knew his efforts had not been in vain. Outside the door, David paused, gazing at the cafe glowing under warm lights. He no longer saw it as just his dream. It had become a shared dream, nurtured by other hands and other hearts. He whispered, as though to himself and the world, a business does not live by profit. It lives by respect, given and received. That evening, countless small retellings spread, around family tables, in friends' messages, across social media. People no longer spoke of a nameless cafe, but of a deeper lesson. What keeps people coming back is not the product, but the feeling of being valued. And so, from one transformation in 24 hours, the seed of respect was sown again, spreading wider than the aroma of fresh coffee carried on the evening wind. Money can buy attention, but only respect can win people's hearts. A cafe, a business, even a lifetime. None will last unless we learn to value one another in every small action. Remember, a sincere smile, a timely thank you, a respectful glance. Sometimes they are stronger than any strategy or revenue chart. If you carry one thing away from this story, let it be this. Respect is the root of all success. Thank you for following this story with us. If you found this video inspiring or it helped you see life in a new light, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your feedback. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any exciting and meaningful videos in the future. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next videos. Wishing you strength and confidence on your journey.